So without further ado, Johan Blumhardt, take it away.
Thank you so much, Wendy. Welcome to another exciting edition of FireBytes. I never thought I would say exciting and compliance in the same sentence, but today's session, we're going to be dealing with compliance with Executive Order MFA. And more specifically, we're going to be looking at some of the Offpoint overview and enhancements. Now, to the bottom of your screen, you'll see our YouTube channel, youtube.com/WatchGuardWest. That is the West Coast. So some of those questions that might be coming in with specifics, we might be referring you to a series that I did there. And specifically with that series that we did with Authpoint, we have 4 videos that is under our WatchGuardWest YouTube channel. We have a new to MFA, start here. We have configure the WatchGuard SSL VPN compliance, MFA configuring external identities for synchronization to Authpoint. And then we also have a IKV2 VPN connections with Authpoint and Active Directory. Now, some of the enhancements that we're going to be covering today are going to slightly change this session here with the SSL VPN client, but we will get into that here a little later. So before I begin, my wife always says, you jump right in, assuming that everyone has a base knowledge of technology and acronyms. So I wanted to slow things down a little bit and take a step back and say, what is MFA? And specifically, we'll talk about multi-factor authentication. That's what MFA is and why MFA, and ultimately how that plays into the executive order. Now, as I mentioned, MFA is multi-factor authentication. So it's much more than just a simple username and password. We're now adding on one layer more of complexity to avoid someone taking out breach credentials and misusing those. Now, you might have seen in the news lately, it's hard not to, but in case you have too much news overload, we do have a website called secplicity.org that is powered by WatchGuard Technologies. And ultimately, with this website, we bring the most critical news as it pertains to cybersecurity to the forefront, hopefully, of your mind, so that you don't need to subscribe to 50 different channels. You can subscribe to one channel and see that. Now, just August 20th, so a few days ago, we had mobile carriers leak 123 million customer records in 1 week. Now, this is no news or no new news when it comes to cybersecurity. We've been having these types of headline news for the past, ever since I've been at WatchGuard, which is basically almost 9 years now. In this particular instance, we did see last week, we saw 70 million AT&T customers and 53 million T-Mobile customers have had their personal data leaked to hackers. Now, in some data leaks, they're going to be varied. Some will not include the password, others will. So ultimately, with all of those in consideration, those are extremely critical. Now, extremely critical that they don't happen, and that we do everything that we can to stop those breaches from happening in my organization. In my organization, meaning I was a previous network administrator. Now, I see this and I say, well, I don't know if I'm unique, but I think to myself, I want to see how they actually got this data, right? We've heard from Home Depot, we hear about those data breaches. Now, in this particular example, I came across this post by Jeremy Kirk. This person who claims to have compromised T-Mobile says the company misconfigured a gateway GPRS support node that was apparently used for testing. It was exposed to the internet. That allowed the person to eventually pivot to the local area network, LAN, proof screenshot supplied. So ultimately, I love this. It says there's no right to privacy on this server. He had access to the server, or someone gained access and ultimately got those customer records from there. Now, one of the more critical ones and leading up to the executive order that came out was the hackers breach a Colonial pipeline using compromised passwords. Now, unless you were a hermit in the middle of Oregon without internet connection somewhere, you probably saw a myriad of memes of people filling up gas, plastic bags, garbage bags in the back of their truck because the pipeline was shut down. And ultimately, this got the government's attention. Well, how can we stop these from happening over and over again, right? It's kind of like Groundhog Day with all of these data breaches happening. And ultimately, this one had an impact on the nation, and specifically the East Coast. So again, we came back to an article from secplicity.org. President Biden orders massive overhaul of federal agency security. What does that actually mean? So ultimately, it came in response to recent cyber security events like the SolarWinds breach, the Microsoft Exchange vulnerabilities, and ultimately, as I just mentioned, the Colonial pipeline ransomware. Now, what that ultimately means is that we are trying to establish an increased stance of government and all civilian agencies it contracts with requiring multi-factor authentication and a zero trust architecture. Now, here at WatchGuard with MFA, we can supply that requirement through AuthPoint, which is our multi-factor authentication. We'll dive a little bit more into that and how we make it easier. Now, with the acquisition of Panda, we actually have that zero trust architecture from an endpoint standpoint. So stay tuned for future sessions as it applies there and as we bring it into the WatchGuard Cloud. Ultimately, when we look at the executive order on improving the nation's security, and I am in the West Coast, just in Oregon, so it is a little bit early to go into each of these paragraphs here, but I did want to bring up one of the things that came to the forefront of my mind in this nation's cybersecurity executive order is it says establishing multi-factor risk-based authentication and conditional access across the enterprise. Now, ultimately, what that means is that we are not just going to allow, for instance, a username and password to VPN in. We will, using multi-factor, add in one additional layer of security. And I'll demonstrate how easy that is today to demonstrate that for you. Now, if you're like me and you've thought about your bank, you say, okay, well, I already have MFA products. Are they not equal? And unfortunately, this you might have heard a little website called Reddit. I say little, obviously it's not a little website, but they had a security incident, right? Again, ransomware, where someone broke in and grabbed, sorry, not ransomware, it was a data leak where someone grabbed a database backup containing old Salta and hash passwords. Ultimately, what came out in the bottom line of this is that not all MFA products are created equal. They were using the SMS-based authentication, much like we see with regional banks, that they will text you, for instance, a code, and then you can go ahead and put in that code. The problem with that is that the SMS, they were attacked with SMS intercept. So if we talk about, for instance, pushing a text message to a phone, you can either have some sort of malware on that phone, or you can have an intercept that the SMS intercept, which then negates all of your two-factor authentication. So no, not all MFA products are equal. Which brings us to Offpoint MFA multi-factor authentication, some of the main features. Now, as you know, me in the past, we will throw out the slides and go to a full demo environment, but I do like to have, it is critical to see some of these features in a table form. So the nice thing is most of these people, most everyone, including 3 of my children, are now carrying around cell phones, which means that we could tie into that as a mobile token. So nothing extra to carry. You think back to maybe 8 years ago and people used to have key rings with 8 different authenticators on there. Now we can have the authenticator application on the phone, and you can even have multiple authenticator apps on the phone, right? So we do appreciate if it is all going through AuthPoint, and we'll show you how you can do that as well. With the AuthPoint app, we have 3 authentication features in one. So all in one token, we have a time-based one-time password. So that's going to be typical to what you've seen with keyring, one-time passwords. We also have a push-based authentication. This is going to be for the best user experience and the most secure because this is happening over 443 channel. And then a lot of people question, well, what happens if we have a computer that's offline, right? I used to travel a fair amount from work. What happens if I was in 40,000 feet in the air trying to log into my desktop? We have our QR code-based authentication through here as well. We have our multi-token app. We can also include third-party tokens. I'll show that to you. And then we have a device DNA. So one of our competitors, they will allow you to have, for instance, the app on multiple phones. And let's say you get the latest iPhone, you load up your profile. Now that exists on your old phone and your new phone, which then is a security vulnerability. And we're tying directly into that device DNA as well. So we're preventing that cloning access. We also have a PIN protection or biometric access as well. that's going to protect against unauthorized access, and then mobile biometrics integration, as I just mentioned, tying into either Touch ID or facial recognition. Now, as we talk about the components, everything is, and you've heard this if you've attended any of our FireBytes within the last year or so, everything is moving to WatchGuard Cloud. That management, authentication, logs, reports all happens from WatchGuard Cloud. The other point this brings up is, well, what happens if I don't have a WatchGuard Firebox? Can I still use MFA? Absolutely. If you're using any of our competitors' products, firewalls, you can tie right into that through a technology called a radius server. So this is completely independent of our firewall. From there, you have our AuthPoint mobile app. This is running on Android, iPhone, and this is your ultimately your authenticator. Then you have your AuthPoint Windows logon and Mac logon. That's going to be logon protection, whether you're offline or online. I'll show that to you here momentarily as well. But ultimately, this also brings up the point that, well, what happens if this computer is in my office, right, and it's a secured environment? One of the enhancements is that we can have network location objects. So if they are located on premise, we don't need to have MFA when they log into their computer. And then ultimately, we have the AuthPoint gateway. Now, this is going to be the corporate network gateway, and it's ultimately going to sync Active Directory and LDAP as well as authentication. So no passwords are being stored in the cloud. And this also supplies a radius proxy. Now, if you're running a WatchGuard firewall 12.7.1 or later, we have direct integration right from the firewall itself, so you don't need this radius proxy. We also do have more advanced configurations as well. If you're looking at Azure Active Directory or any one of those other more advanced services, which we won't cover today, but you can go back and look at our YouTube channel for those resources. And then we also have our AuthPoint agents, tight integration with third-party applications to also include API support. So if you're a software vendor looking at how you can include MFA, you can do that through our third-party application. So how do you get started? Is it extremely expensive? We actually are running a promo right now where you can get free AuthPoint MFA, multi-factor authentication, 60 days and protection up to 250 users. Now, if you are interested in this, all you have to do is go to this bit.ly link. I don't prefer bit.ly for security ramifications, but what you could do is go to the WatchGuard website and easily find this page, or you can just go to the bit.ly link here, MFA trial, which brings you to AuthPoint. And ultimately, this is going to secure your VPNs, which will demonstrate cloud applications, which will also demonstrate remote access. And again, a number of you, unfortunately, still have RDP resources or servers set up to the outside world. What I would recommend is that you put those behind your VPN, your Firebox, or another third-party VPN concentrator, and then secure that with MFA. So before we dive in, I did want to give you some additional resources. So we have sync users with Azure Active Directory, sync users from Active Directory. Now these are going to be on the previous sessions as well that I covered with AuthPoint. So you can see that integrating with Office 365. I'll give you a demonstration how that works. And then integrating with SSL VPN, which we will demonstrate as well. Again, I don't like bit.ly links per se, but it gives it a nice, easy way to give you a link right from there that you can remember. All right, so how do we configure with SSL VPN with AuthPoint when we tie into our new enhancement, right? So this is with 12.7.1, we are tying directly into WatchGuard Cloud. So the first step is that you need to connect your Firebox. And again, this is assuming that you're with a Firebox. If you don't have a Firebox, you could just look at our integration guides. If you had one of our competitors' firewalls, this again is assuming that you have a Firebox. So the first step is that you're going to connect that Firebox 12.7.1 or higher to WatchGuard Cloud as a locally managed Firebox. So this is not to be confused. You might have heard verbiage or might have seen a demo where one of your sales engineers from WatchGuard demonstrate how to actually manage your Firebox from the cloud. This is specifically as a locally managed Firebox, so it's not changing the management structure of that. However, you do need to connect to WatchGuard Cloud, which requires total or basic security subscription. Now with that, that total or basic security subscription, you might have heard me tout as well that this is going to give you that visibility in WatchGuard Cloud at no additional cost. So it's just bringing additional value add to your basic security subscription or your total security subscription. From there, you're going to add the Firebox as a Firebox resource in AuthPoint. I'll show that to you. And then add an AuthPoint policy for the Firebox resource. Add your users and groups. And again, when you talk about rolling out MFA, what I would highly suggest is going back to that series. And I have a recommendation of steps in rolling out MFA before you lock your boss's laptop with MFA, and then he can't get into it because you haven't set up these resources. So just be cautious of that. Now with a VPN, obviously it's a little bit different. Again, I would be cautious though on this process. Then we move over to the Firebox side. You're going to select VPN, mobile VPN, and configure. Go to your authentication tab and add in the AuthPoint authentication server. Now this is the direct tie-in, so we don't need to add in the Radius server. Or if you're previous to 12.7.1 or you do not have your basic or total subscription, you could still tie in your Radius resources here. You want to add in users and groups, create new group, and copy and paste the name of the AuthPoint group. That's a critical component because if you don't complete this process, or this bank teller's LDAP through AuthPoint, you won't be able to complete that process from there. Now, as we talk about the other network AuthPoint enhancements before we dive in and take a look at a live scenario, again, you do have a number of other enhancements, right? I alluded to the fact that we have network location. So this is going to allow the configuration of AuthPoint policies depending on where a resource is based on the IP address. Also allows a time schedule. So it allows configuration of a time pattern to allow or disallow AuthPoint policies. And again, you might have heard me mention previously, why are we allowing these resources to be open if it's outside of our work hours and we don't need it? Now, some of you might need a 24/7 VPN concentrator, and certainly I wouldn't suggest in that case to add a time policy, but your needs may vary. So let's go ahead and dive into the demo from here. All right, so hopefully everyone can see my screen still. Now, this is my iPhone here, it's running. You can see I have my home screen. This is the AuthPoint app. Now, there's a number of features about this. Don't get worried. Most people in a normal working environment are only going to have 1 or 2 tokens from here. And keep in mind that as this push notification comes through, I don't actually have to launch my AuthPoint app to get that notification. Now, you can see some of these resources. These are set up through WatchGuard Cloud. I'll cover that shortly. But if you scroll down, you'll see some. These are typical one-time password, and as this is rolling across, it's going to expire and give me another one-time password. Now, in order of security and complexity, obviously the most secure method is going to be your push method. The second from there is going to be your QR code, which I'll demonstrate as well. That makes sure that we have access to our token, physical access. The next one's going to be a one-time password, and then, or excuse me, one-time password enhanced by biometric. That's right here. And then the last one's going to be this one-time password. The reason why I say this is because if I'm at an airport and someone's peeking over my shoulder and looking at that password, or perhaps social engineered, they would be able to get access to that possibly. From there, you have your third-party tokens, your Facebook, your LastPass. Again, anything that most modern tokens can support, I support it there. Then when I go into my LastPass to manage all of my different passwords, I can simply type in my one-time password from there. And then my Amazon account, also another critical one in my AuthPoint app. From there, we have a QR code reader, which I'll demonstrate to you. That's useful for activating tokens or doing offline authentication. From there, we have our migration of tokens. So let's say I did buy a new phone. I could simply click on this and migrate my tokens over to a new device. So all tokens will be deleted and reactivated on that new one. I'm going to go ahead and click on no. From there, I have my menu as well. I can say I want to go into token security, manually activate tokens. Now, the other critical component is that I can back up third-party tokens as well from there. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look at the desktop manager or a VPN from there. So I'm going to bring over my Windows 10 here, computer, And I'm going to show you, so I'm going to say, let's not restart now. Hopefully the demo gods stay with me and everything works as necessary. But in this case, this is demonstrated a Windows 10 environment. I have the WatchGuard mobile VPN with SSL client. This again is free. And this is going, a lot of times people say, well, how many customers can I have VPNing in? This is on our data sheets for our firewalls or fireboxes. So in this particular case, I'm going to go ahead and enter my super simple password. My server's here and my username is indicated as well. I go ahead and click on connect. It's going to contact the server, and ultimately what it's doing at this point is reaching out to WatchGuard Cloud. It says, are you trying to sign in? I click on approve. And again, it's a very easy process in that, and if I had an Apple Watch, it would prompt me even on my Apple Watch. I can go ahead and allow it to complete through the process, and it's now connected to my network. Very easy to do. Now, what happens if, as an example, that application wasn't at the forefront of my, I'm going to disconnect, wasn't at the forefront, right? So let's go ahead and say I'm here. Let's type in the WatchGuard SSL VPN. Now, we also do tie in directly with the native clients as well. There are probably some questions coming in on the background of the channel or on this. So you can see here, it drops the banner. Are you trying to sign in? I click on this and approve that way. Now, as I was mentioning, there probably are some questions coming in about which VPN client. That is covered under our VPN overview series posted on our YouTube channel. So you might want to check that out as well from there. I'm going to go ahead and disconnect this, and I want to show you some of the other features as well. So I'm going to go ahead and disconnect here. I'm going to bring over my Windows 8 computer. That's going to show you my desktop or my user logon experience. So in this case, I have a Windows 8. This is a smart user with TDR, also has Offpoint on this computer. Jack tries to log in, types in his password. Again, we don't even care the complexity of his password. He says sign in. Now you'll see here, one of these users will be activated. Are you trying to sign in as Jack? It automatically sends a push notification. I can go ahead and click on approve from there. It goes ahead and logs into my desktop. Now, what happens if that desktop is in my on my physical premises? I can set up a network policy object so that I don't have that MFA solution for that. Now, I did want to bring up as well, what happens if this computer, or let's say if this computer is not on the network? So in this case, we're going to say we're on a plane. This push notification is going to try to push, but we're on a plane, so we're going to go ahead and discard that push notice. I go ahead and click on QR code. And again, this is because it's a QR code and we're using a QR code reader, we are verifying that Johan, or in this case, Jack, is in physical access of his token, which is his cell phone. So I'm going to activate the QR code reader, which is that camera up there. I go ahead and point the QR code over the QR code, or the reader over the QR code. And then you can see that I get this verification or one-time password from there. But again, it's going to take out that social engineering aspect from there. Now, oftentimes in this demo, people say, well, what happens if that phone is lost? Now, what we can actually do from there, let's say that phone's out of the picture, literally, I'm going to disconnect that phone. I'm going to bring up WatchGuard Cloud. Now, this is a great time to introduce you to WatchGuard Cloud and how easy it is to manage your users from there. So I'm in WatchGuard Cloud summary. I can see I have 3 active users, 5 groups. And again, everything is being managed from WatchGuard Cloud. So no configuration to put on the local area network. But from there, I have my users, and I can see all of my users here. Now, if Jack calls my help desk and he says, hey, by the way, I've forgotten my phone, left it at home, I can say, okay, well, Jack, let me verify it's you. Perhaps I verify his birthday to make sure I'm not getting social engineered. Now, keep in mind, most of your organizations, you're thinking about if you have 1 or 2 network users. However, where I was in a school district, I had 3,000 people, right? So I wouldn't necessarily know Jack's voice if I heard it. So Jack says, okay, I'm signing into my computer. Say, okay, Jack, when you've signed in, you're going to say forgot token. From there, it starts this forgot token process. So I'm going to walk through it on this system administrator side. I say forgot token. Okay, say, Jack, I need to know how many hours you want to bypass multi-factor authentication. He says, well, 8 hours, a typical workday. I say, okay, I put in 8 hours here. I need you to read this activation code. So he tells me, okay, it's 611247. And again, this is making sure that we're not being social engineered. I generate a one-time verification code, 467. If I can type everything in correctly, 563. And now it's going to bypass, or should bypass, MFA for the period of 8 hours. Now, in the event that he signs out and his wife brings him his phone, he could then go in and sign right back into his device here or into his computer, and it'll say, we want to go in and do a push notification, and now we've reverted that back. So again, all of these are right from here. All of my users are being identified. Now, as I mentioned, one of the critical things as we talk about our enhancements, I'm going to bring this out of the way here. As we talk about some of the enhancements that we've included in WatchGuard Cloud, specifically with AuthPoint, we have our wizards. So this is going to be able to simplify, configure MFA for a VPN, sync users for Active Directory, MFA for computers, or hardware tokens. We do supply hardware tokens as well. But ultimately, what it comes down to is that we are building these authentication policies that we can rearrange just like we see on our firewall side. So when we talk about our VPN, we can say, I want to allow my bank tellers to be able to get to my data center. We can, again, specify a policy object or a network or a time schedule as well from there. And ultimately, what it comes down to is that we're building our, so this is our policy object, but our resources allow us to tie in. So as soon as the Firebox is tied to WatchGuard Cloud, it then becomes a resource that we can add here as an available resource. We can supply our Firebox. This is our M370 to supply our VPN connection. Now, as we look at the other side of it, right, let's go ahead and look at the firewall side and see how easy that is to set up multi-factor authentication. So again, many of you are familiar with our firewall. This is our web UI. Obviously, we could do this through our WatchGuard System Manager as well. I simply go into, mobile VPN, under VPN here, and I go under Configure SSL VPN. From there, I say I want to go and click on the lock to allow changes. I go to authentication. By default, WatchGuard AuthPoint is not going to be the default, so I'm going to have to move it up. But in this particular case, I would say create new user. As I mentioned, you need that exact spelling of that group. I would go in and say create new AuthPoint group, create that group, and paste that right from there. Now, that's as easy as it is to set up AuthPoint. We see our servers there, and we see our advanced options as well that we don't even need to get into for this configuration. Now, what happens, let's go ahead and give the final demonstration of what happens when we have our SAML resources set up. So just like at WatchGuard, what we have is a few different resources that we set up through our IDP portal. Now, our IDP portal is our identity provider through WatchGuard, and this is what we use for our corporate resources. So you'll see here, this is hosted by AuthPoint at WatchGuard Cloud. I'm going to go ahead and type in my username or select it from my password manager, my password. It's going to send a push notification. I did disconnect my phone, but you'll see here, I can go ahead and click on approve on my phone, just like you saw before. And now this gives me all of my applications that are set up, Web 2.0 applications that are set up through SAML. So SAML is security assertion markup language. And again, you could run through a lot of those wizards online, but ultimately what that means is that as I go into, let's go Office 365, where are we? Office 365, you'll notice that it will automatically sign me in. I do like to have that selection there, but I don't need to type in the password, and it automatically identifies me right from here as my user without having to sign in again. Now I could also do that from my expense application. This is Concur, and again, these are applications that are set up through SAML integration. Now, oftentimes people say, well, what happens if they try to go to Office 365 directly? If they go to Office 365 directly, they'll be prompted with the Microsoft sign-in app. And again, this will also apply if they're setting up Outlook as an application. It'll take them to the sign-in page. At this point, they type in, just go through that process that we just went through, and you'll notice that it switched over to our AuthPoint. From there, I would type in the password and get into send push notice, and it would direct me to Office 365. So we have two options. One is that they can go to their identity provider portal this way, or they go specifically or directly to Office 365, and then they are granted access through that push process. All right, I see that we are a few minutes over. Thank you for bearing with me. I do want to give you this survey to fill out. This helps Russell and I, ultimately Wendy, derive content. Do we need to deep dive in a specific area? So please take a minute to fill that out. At this point, wanted to make sure that, see if there were any questions for myself. All right, I noticed a number of questions, maybe too many to cover with this time that we have. Okay, Matthew says the slide with 5 bit.ly links on there about setting up various integrations. I assume that you want to bring that up again, so let me bring that up here for you. Matthew, hopefully that's helpful. There was Mike sent in a question. MFA tied to a FireBytes user. Now, what I would recommend is that from the FireBytes side, you tie the FireBytes to an AuthPoint user. But if you're asking specifically for the admin account, that one is coming out. But I would look at it the other way, Mike, about tying in the FireBytes to an AuthPoint user. Jim says, was there a reason why you switched from Windows 10 to Windows 8 for that part of the demo? Great observation, Jim. The only difference was that I've had the Windows 8 demo for quite a while, and my laptop didn't have that big of a hard drive for Windows 10. Since then, I'm now doing my demos off of a iMac that's 4 terabytes, so it allows me to do Windows 10, and I just haven't switched that over into my Windows 10 environment. Ron says, can we get a recording of this FireBytes? Absolutely, we will be posting that up onto YouTube here shortly. John says about John Irving brings up the security vulnerabilities. So, and my apologies for not going specifically more into that, but locations, if you go into your locations, you could tie that into, so if I, into our network policy objects here. And again, you don't have to use this. This is simply making it a little bit easier, but my headquarters, my network location, I can specify an IP address. So unless someone is able to clone my IP address, we aren't creating that security vulnerability unless, for instance, Wendy is trying to hack me when we're both at corporate headquarters, which she would never do, as I hear her coming online. But ultimately, we are minimizing the network hole that we have for that. All right, Wendy.
Yeah, I think that was a great show. Thanks to everyone for engaging in the Q&A. We have a growing list of conversations and questions. If we didn't get a chance to follow up with a small handful of folks, we will definitely follow up with you afterwards. And again, we'll include some of these links that many of you have asked for in follow-up emails, as well as a link to the recording. Please be sure to give us some feedback on our SurveyMonkey survey. We want to know what is most important to you for future episodes. And with that, I think we'll end today's webinar. Thank you, Johan, and for presenting today, and thank you, Russell, for answering all the technical questions behind the scenes. We'll see you next month on the 4th Thursday of the month. Take care, everyone.